Reconnaissance Man is the story of an American warrior you've likely never heard of, but will not forget once you do. In Episode 1, Good Morning Vietnam, we follow retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel James Lyle Steele into the earliest days of America's entry into the Vietnam War, before the conflict had become the war most remember, and before U.S. forces were deployed in large numbers. Steele was there at the leading edge, part of the original generation of Marine Reconnaissance men operating in the shadows of a war that was only beginning to take shape. Poisoned bamboo, tainted food, secret tunnels, ambushes, and losses that never fully leaves. This is not just the story of combat, but of endurance, instinct, sacrifice, and how far one man can be pushed over a lifetime of service. Created by investigative journalist Ashly McGlone in collaboration with the Marine Reconnaissance Foundation and visually brought to life by Combat Story, this 9-episode limited series traces Steele's extraordinary 30-year military career through Vietnam, the Cold War, and beyond. Through candid interviews recorded later in his life, his first-hand memories are paired with historical context, narration, and immersive storytelling to preserve a chapter of service that too often goes unseen. This is Reconnaissance Man, Episode 1, Good Morning Vietnam, and this is only the beginning.
That was our biggest concern, was booby traps, and they had some ingenious ways of doing it. Whether it was bamboo or metal, didn't matter. But your own weight stabbed those things into it. Then they tried to pull you out. They couldn't. They tunneled down under the town like a honeycomb. They said there was 100 miles of tunnels under there. So at night, bing, bing, someone's shooting at them from inside the camp. And we were on a little trail, and on Toast is a tracked vehicle that looks like a baby tank. And that damn thing hit a mine, and it freshly refueled. Pieces everywhere. And so we spent the next day, part of that day and the next day, going around picking pieces of meat off the bushes.
The Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s turned thousands of young men in the United States into hardened warriors. More than 3 million American troops were sent to the region, and 58,000 would lose their lives. Officially, U.S. combat troops were in the country from 1965 to 1973. But talk to retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel James Steele, and he'll tell you military advisors the U.S. sent to Vietnam back in 1961 were already knee-deep in battle preparations. He would know. He was one of those advisors. Steele would deploy to Vietnam a total of 3 times, returning after his brother died and after being shot through both legs. What he witnessed and endured there was often brutal and bone-chilling. In a series of interviews at his home in Lake Forest, California, Steele laid out the mission as the men saw it and the cost paid to try to achieve it. Ultimately, the Vietnam War was a failure for the United States. Once U.S. troops went home and fully handed over the anti-communist fight to the South Vietnamese, it wasn't long before the Northerners took control of the entire country and consolidated their power. The price paid in Vietnamese blood from both sides of the contested border was steep. An estimated 3.3 million Vietnamese people died, most of them civilians, according to Vietnam's official estimate released in 1995. For the U.S. troops, though, their mission had been clear. Steele said, quote, "It was very simple. The communists have invaded the South, and we were going to help them defend themselves against communism. And way back then, communism was a dirty word." Steele's war stories have particular intrigue, partly because he was part of the Marines' inaugural Force Reconnaissance Team, an elite group that was required to be the best at land, air, and sea operations in the harshest conditions. I also grew up hearing some of the stories from time to time because Steele is my grandfather. I am Ashly McGlone. I'm an investigative journalist by profession, but more importantly, I am a member of the large Steele family based in Orange County, California. My mother is one of 6 children born to Marlena Laura Beck and James Lyle Steele. Steele's military journey through Vietnam and beyond wasn't easy for the boy from tiny Kimball, Nebraska. His career would lead to loss, trauma, and multiple fights for survival in the battlefield and hospital bed. As we spoke, I was surprised by how much he recalled with clarity and even fondness. We'll start with his first trip as an advisor to Vietnam and hear about the conditions, weapons, tactics, and more. Later, we'll explore some of the more terrifying events during his time abroad in Vietnam, as well as Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and South Korea. We will also circle back to Steele's childhood and try to figure out how he managed to transform himself from a shy child into an expert Marine. What was his childhood like, and why would he choose to repeatedly risk life and limb to test new military contraptions that left him burned and scarred? Why go back to Vietnam when he could have taken a job out of the line of fire? We'll get to that, but here is Reconnaissance Man, Episode 1, Good Morning, Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam.
My first trip over was on a ship. It was a civilian, like a cruise liner, but you had to stay below the bottom 2 decks. You couldn't go up the 3rd deck because there were people, real live people up there.
When Steele went to Vietnam for the first time in 1961, he was a new officer. He had asked for Vietnam, and they were eager to send the upstart who went to Ranger School and earned a spot among the Marine Corps' finest, the Force Reconnaissance Team, or Force Recon for short.
The first time I went there was only 5 Marines. The advisory group was 4 permanent guys, and I was a new guy, came in on what they call temporary additional duty to learn what I could about how that war was being fought, what worked, what didn't, and then go back to 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa and share that information and help with their training.
It turned out there was a lot to learn about fighting a war in Vietnam.
Here's a good example. Back in Okinawa, the Marines were taught if you're ambushed in a vehicle, you'd empty your rifle and jump out and get in a ditch. Well, that made sense. Except in Vietnam, the VC had people in the ditches with spears and swords. And actually, what would have happened, you'd have jumped in a ditch with an empty rifle. This guy raises up and spears you like a fish. Man, oh man. So that was one of the big things.
The U.S. president at the time was John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy and other U.S. leaders were paying close attention to Vietnam and worried about communist forces expanding their power globally. This was part of the Cold War, after all. Kennedy issued a warning in a speech to the United Nations General Assembly in September 1961.
Terror is not a new weapon. Throughout history, it has been used by those who could not prevail, either by persuasion or example. But inevitably, they fail, either because men are not afraid to die for a life worth living, or because the terrorists themselves came to realize that free men cannot be frightened by threats and that aggression would meet its own response. And it is in the light of that history that every nation today should know, be he friend or foe, that the United States has both the will and the weapons to join free men in standing up to their responsibilities.
The Soviet Union and Chinese governments backed Vietnam's northern fighters and their guerrilla fighter allies in the South, known as the Viet Cong, in a bid to overtake the South. The United States was coming to the South's aid, and the U.S. advisors would embed with the South Vietnamese military, known as the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN. Their mission was clear, and Marines like Steele were motivated to serve their country and help an ally under siege.
It was very simple. Communists have invaded the South, and we were going to help them defend themselves against communism. And way back then, communism was a dirty word. When I first went over there on that first little tour, we had a chance to see a village chief's head stuck on a pole. They had come in during the night, taken their money, killed people, resisted, cut his head off, and stuck it on a pole with the warning, do not remove the head. That head was hanging there. So that inspired you to help them, if they're going to treat their own people that way, you know. But there was never any question of should we be there or not at first. In fact, I never did have that feeling.
Steele didn't know much about Vietnam. When he got there, he snagged a copy of a tourist brochure in Saigon, the South's capital city. It advertised hunting tigers and elephants.
Tigers are being numerous in every region, and during each season offer fine targets. Panthers are also abundant. There are a dissimilar species. The biggest one has the black flecked skin. The common panther is smaller with more numerous black spots, and the nebulous panther is more smaller. Hunting season is from October to April. As a special courtesy for foreign visitors, out-of-season hunting permits may be issued to them.
Steele never saw a tiger, but said 2 did attack American soldiers during the war.
One, it was a dark, dark night, and they were set up on a hilltop, and they heard this horrible scream. And they went over, the drag mark, a tiger had grabbed a Marine and drug him off.
A 1969 Stars and Stripes military newspaper article described the ordeal and had a photo of the 9-foot, 400-pound tiger, which was shot dead and strung up like a trophy. Snakes also posed a threat.
2-step viper, if that thing bit you, they said you had 2 steps and you're going down. And they looked, they were green, they could get up in the trees and that, you couldn't even see them.
On the move one night with South Vietnamese Ranger troops, Americans encountered a different unexpected foe.
Well, that was where there was a water buffalo out there. And the Rangers would go right around this guy, no problem. And here comes an American. Like on the bullfight movies. That son of a gun could smell Americans. One guy was telling me that when he did that, the damn thing charged him and hit him so hard it broke his pack off his back. It didn't attack me, but it didn't like me at all.
In a letter to his wife Marlene, dated November 24th, 1961, Steele highlighted the various animals in Vietnam, as well as the terrain, and called it a very beautiful country. The two had married July 9th, 1960. Steele wrote, quote, "It would be a hunter's paradise if not for the war which restricts travel. Up north there were elephants, wild water buffalo, tigers, panthers, and both alligator and crocodiles. Down south here there are waterfowl in great numbers, which get good and fat in the endless rice fields." In the same letter, Steele says he is enjoying his trip. Quote, "I'm sure beyond any doubt that I'll hate to leave Vietnam and go back to Okinawa," Steele wrote. "I have learned so much over here that's impossible to learn any other way. I just hope I can put the experience to good use for the Marine Corps." U.S. troops learned 2 specific scents would easily give away their location to enemy forces if they weren't careful: cigarette smoke and bug spray. Steele opted for a B vitamin for bug repellent, and he never smoked.
So I said, I'm never going to smoke and get hooked like that. So I never did, and I didn't smoke it at home. I was running tracks. I never did smoke, and overseas, sea rations had a little pack of, I think, 6 cigarettes, and you could trade those if you didn't smoke.
What would you trade yours for? Do you remember?
Oh, I like a fruit cocktail, and I'm the only guy that I know of that gained weight on sea rations.
Viet Cong fighters used hidden punji sticks or sharpened bamboo contaminated with venom or feces to cause pain and infection.
Well, I was really lucky. They had a pit, and they had these bamboo stakes, and instead of stepping On that, I stepped on the very edge and it crumbled and I went down in. So one of them got me a stab right over here, but I got right off it and out. A lot of times they put barbs on them like a fish hook. So you try to pull your leg out and it just, this was lucky. I didn't have any barbs on it, but man, did that hurt. That bothered me for 2 weeks, I think. But there's nothing they could do. I just had to watch it, make sure it didn't get infected.
How prevalent was the bamboo?
Everywhere. That was our biggest concern, was booby traps. And they had some ingenious ways of doing it. Boy, oh boy. They had two boards. They got the hole, 2 boards. And then when you step on the boards, they'd let your foot go through, and that would close them. And that would stick the things into you. Whether it was bamboo or metal, didn't matter. But your own weight stabbed those things into it. And then they tried to pull you out. They couldn't. And then they got real clever and they booby-trapped the pit so that when the good guys came to help you, they're trying to dig that out of there, help you. They were ingenious. I don't know how anyone could not admire their ability. No tanks. Well, they had a few tanks at the end, but no planes, no nothing. Just back, shirt on their back, and off they go.
The Vietnamese landscape was full of surprises.
That was probably the biggest surprise, was that we'd been training for jungle and we were in the Arizona desert. And
did you find yourself in both environments over time, or less?
Yeah, and some of it so thick you couldn't walk through it. And then if you try to take a machete and cut your way, everybody hears you coming. That doesn't work.
Navigating the terrain was difficult. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, named for the communist North Vietnam leader, was a vital pipeline for the communists sending troops and supplies south through neighboring Laos and Cambodia. The trails were operable by 1959 and would expand to cover at least 10,000 miles. Bombing the trail would prove futile. Damage was quickly repaired.
They started out talking Ho Chi Minh Trail as if it was a path. Well, it wasn't. It was a number of paths that interconnected. So, see, the dumb officers in Saigon, well, let's send some Marines over there and block the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Like you block a street from in front of a school or something. Oh, man. Then later and later, we learned all about it. You couldn't hardly do much there because the trail now became 5 trails. And you don't know where they are. In the daytime, you could spot them sometimes. An aircraft spotter, little low and slow planes, and they'd shoot them up. And then we had the SOG people, Special Operations Group, actually there, the Ho Chi Minh Trail area. And they'd watch for a cluster of them and they'd call airstrike. And boy, that was effective. We never did really slow them down. And they were bringing trucks down. You saw the bicycle guys. Well, they could flop over in the bush and you wouldn't see them. We had trucks. And then toward the end, they were bringing tanks down there.
That was above ground. Below ground, Viet Cong fighters, or VC, were also on the move, but that wouldn't be known for years to come.
Cu Chi, the town, they tunneled down under the town like a honeycomb. Just, oh my God. Someone tried to figure out how many miles of tunnel, because you'd have a main shooting in these offshoots. They said there was 100 miles of tunnels under there. So they could come in one way and go down and come out another. And one of the Army divisions moved their headquarters over right on top. Had no idea it was under there. So at night, bing, bing, someone's shooting at them from inside the camp. And they give the security officer a ration of crap. God damn it, you're letting them through. Get out there. And they started inside. They pop up and shoot them, go back down.
They're like, it's not our fault you came and sat on our anthill.
Discover the tunnels until a tank came along and crashed through one of them. And then, of course, the cat's out of the bag then.
Steele would later climb inside one of those tunnels on a return trip to the country in 2007. He learned they drew power from a familiar source.
They used cast-off American batteries and bulbs to light their tunnels. That's one of the places where I said, you can't help but admire them. They were so ingenious.
So one of the former North Vietnamese combatants who was interviewed for the special I was looking at, said they controlled the air, but we controlled the land. And like, I don't know if that's how you felt at the time or not, but it was like they obviously knew the terrain better than anybody. Yeah. And then you manipulated it very clearly to conceal, disguise, function underground. Like, that kind of blew me away, but I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That's why, yeah, you can power down from the top. And obviously there were boots on the ground, but when they're already there.
Well, it's like you controlled the ground you were standing on. Outside of that, you didn't know. And they would like ambush you and then run. And so you're trying to catch up or you're trying to get even or something, and now there's no one there. So you go up here and then you turn this way, they're there again. They controlled the ground. Did a good job of it too. And you'll see how the country was laced with hedgerows. Thick hedges. And even a tank couldn't get through those a lot of places. So a person certainly couldn't. So you'd be trapped inside these hedgerows, shooting at you, and they had cut a little hole where they could slither back out. We never could even get over where they were. They controlled the ground.
Ingenious was a word Steele used time and again to describe those he fought.
What did you expect and what did you not expect about being there?
Well, I didn't expect that they would be so ingenious in the things that they could do. I just defied common sense.
Without the force that you guys were bringing, the same type of weaponry.
And here we have tanks and we've got all this stuff here. And we get in a battle, next thing you know, when they weren't winning, they'd leave. Here we are with our dead and wounded. Oh man, come on. And then, like I say, they would try to take their own out of there. So we had blood all over the place and no bodies to show. And that was a surprise.
VC militants would also stockpile weapons and food in creative ways.
During this same period of supposed fact-finding, I was attached to an Army Special Forces team at Nunlap. And I was going out with them on air patrols. So they sent us over there to search and either capture or destroy what was there. You couldn't carry all that rice out, so they destroyed it. And they had said, be thorough. You know, these guys really know how to hide this stuff. Like they would dig a hole and put stuff in and plant already existing flowers on top. You just see a flower bed. No sign it had been dug recently.
A firefight ensued nearby. This time there would be no U.S. casualties. Steele said sometimes VC fighters surrendered and helped U.S. troops understand the lay of the land.
Chu Hoi was a fighter that surrendered. So you're fighting and you kind of got this guy where you wanted him. You say, Chu Hoi, Chu Hoi. You, Chu Hoi. He'd come over and surrender. And then a lot of those turned around and fought with us as guides. They were former North Vietnamese and VC. And boy, were they valuable. They knew where everything was and they could read the signs. Like if there was alongside the trail 3 rocks about so close, the big rock points to the next big, to the small one. That's where there's a mine. We'd walk along, nothing here but rocks. We'd creep along and find the damn mine before it went off. And in those tunnels, they could spot those entrances where we couldn't. You could not see there was a tunnel there. They had a little, like a box-like thing sitting, and they'd go down in and put the box back on top. Plants would blend over where the edges were. You couldn't find it.
Steele said complaints about working alongside South Vietnamese troops were sometimes fair, but he also saw plenty to admire.
That first trip, I went to Kon Tum, which is right in the center, in the highlands, and that's another place that looks like Arizona. But I was talking to their commanding general, and he was happy to see an American, so he was talking. And he says, okay, let's go take a walk. So we got, he says, I can't talk in my headquarters. They have agents listening all the time. And they're not there to hurt us. They won't kill us. But they're passing information, which is far more dangerous. So if he wanted to say anything secretive, you had to go out and walk with him through the Arizona bushes. Imagine how hard that would be to operate. You know, it's a mistake to say all of the ARVN military were bad. There were lots of them that were. We had occasions where they would be on this flank and here's Americans, and they'd get into it, they'd try to contact them. They're gone. They ran away. They're gone. Didn't say they're going, nothing. So that happened. But at the same time, they had, some really, really fine guys. There's Cal CAO Van Vieng. He was the head of the paratroopers, the Army Airborne. And I saw this with my own eyes. Went out for a jump, and he made a free fall from 12,500 feet. He jumped out without a stopwatch or an altimeter to tell him when it was time to pull. He just was eyeballing, saw how their little houses got bigger. None of our guys do that. He was good. The Marine Commandant was real good, and a couple of the Rangers were real fine. In fact, the Ranger troops were really good. And then they had, from the Ranger troops, they selected airborne rangers. So they went to jump school and Ranger, and they'd throw them in where it was the hottest. And they performed really, really well. And I don't like to hear people say, the Arbans weren't worth a damn, because some of them were.
Even early on, Steele felt like he was in his element. In a letter to his wife Marlene, November 1st, 1961, he wrote, quote, "This whole thing in Vietnam is very interesting to me. They have discovered that the only thing that really works against the guerrillas is ranger operations. They have sent people to our ranger school, and they are running their own now. This ranger-type stuff with guerrilla warfare is right down my alley." Steele's initial trip to Vietnam as a second lieutenant officer was supposed to be only 2 weeks, but when he heard of a planned Marine amphibious assault, he wanted to stick around. He asked for special permission to stay rather than return to the military base in Okinawa. As he waited for the OK in Saigon, one of the South Vietnamese Marines helped him buy a train ticket to the coastal city of Nha Trang, departing the next day. Steele never got on that train. If he had, myself and many of my relatives wouldn't be here.
So that night at the officers club, there was a pilot came over and said, "Hey, you're wearing a Marine Corps uniform." "Yeah." "Well, what are you doing here?" So I told him that I was going up to join the Marines the next day. He said, "How are you going to get up there?" I said, "I got a train ticket." "Well," he says, I'm flying a U something, a commercial airplane, like a 10 people or something. It was an administrative, taking people around. He says, "I'm going up there. So you come with me, I'll fly right to the airfield." So next morning, flew me up there. I discovered that the train I was going to be on had been ambushed by the VC. And to make a political point and a propaganda point, they had taken every single thing off that train, even things they couldn't use, to show how powerful they were. And they killed or captured everybody. There's no way I could have survived that. I don't care who you are. When there's that many carry a whole trainload of stuff off, you're not gonna, or worse yet, be captured. So that was another one. That's one of the missing 10 or 9 lives.
It wasn't long before Steele would have another close call, one of several during his 30-year military career.
And I walked down there and I saw they were being briefed on a helicopter assault. First one of the Vietnam War.
It was December 1961. Steele managed to smooth talk an ARVN pilot to join the operation, which aimed to capture a Viet Cong radio transmitting messages almost every hour across the region. But Steele's presence on board needed to stay under wraps. The South Vietnamese at this point didn't want the North to see the U.S. troops fighting their war.
That night, I went out there and the 20 planes were lined up on a taxiway. And he told me, I'm in the third plane. He says, "I'm not going to complain if you hop on with me." So I'm hiding from 3 in the morning till 10 in the morning. And then by then I was sweating like a pig. At night, these little bushes look like, you can't see me. In the morning, the sun comes up, you're a big blob out in the grass. Oh, I can't understand why they didn't come get me. I could have been a VC. So I laid there. I had my Bowie knife, my own pistol, and a rum bottle full of water. Since I wasn't supposed to be there, I made sure I didn't get up near an officer who would know I'm not supposed to be here. So I stayed clear out at the end with the troopies.
Are you the only white guy on this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I didn't have identifiable clothes like later on we had camis.
The mission was successful.
So there wasn't much of a battle. But we got the radio, it was in a boat, and all kinds of good intelligence. Lists of people, agents in the towns, and breathtaking.
The next morning, troops awoke to a surprise. The Viet Cong had secretly put up a banner nearby with a clear message to the Americans. It translated to, quote, "General Taylor, go home." The banner referred to General Maxwell Taylor, a U.S. military representative sent in 1961 by President Kennedy to South Vietnam to assess the conflict.
So anyway, later in the day, somebody ratted me out to the Vietnamese paratroopers headquarters. When the resupplies are unloaded, get on that helicopter and get out of here. On that first lift, one of the choppers crashed right in front of mine. And Time or Newsweek had a story later. It said, machine gun fire and mortars downed one of them. That's such nonsense. There was no machine guns or mortars fired. Not only didn't hit the plane, they weren't even fired. And over here is an irrigation ditch. Well, that was muddy. Helicopter came in, scoosh, his wheel got stuck in the mud. So he tried to lift out. This side lifted, this side didn't. Down he went. They make it a combat loss instead of a pilot error.
Steele would quickly learn that news coming out of Vietnam wasn't always what it seemed. The incident was also traumatic. In an account written for a counselor in 2009, Steele said when the helicopter flipped onto its side in 1961, quote, "The front rotor blade struck the Vietnamese sergeant major, cutting him in two. One arm, shoulder, neck, and head were thrown approximately 40 yards. It reminded me of a football kickoff. An antenna protruding from the side of the chopper speared one of the troops in the shoulder as it rolled over. It pinned him to the ground like a butterfly to a corkboard on display. He was alive, but I couldn't move him. I had nothing to cut the antenna with, so I dug the dirt out from underneath him. When his body sank into the hole, the antenna came out and I could move him. The stress was almost overwhelming. It felt like I was moving in slow motion while digging with my knife. The chopper was on fire and I was afraid it would explode at any moment. I carried him away to a safe distance, but he was dead by then." After the crash, Steele and the other men also got to work picking up helicopter debris from the pineapple field.
They couldn't leave it there because the VC would get up on it and jump up and down for pictures. So they decided we didn't have a helicopter then could lift him. So they decided they would destroy him. Flew in a bunch of explosives, blew the plane up, and then we had the paratrooper lined up and went through the pineapples, picking up any piece, looked like an airplane. Took those back, and then where they had blown it, now there's a hole. So they put a big charge down there, and we'd throw in all the pieces we found, another one on top, and boom, do it again. Well, there's less pieces now, but when we got done, well, where the rotor blades hook into the top was big, thick, rough. You couldn't blow that up. So they put that on the supply helicopter and flew it out. But at the end, there was just a pile of fresh dirt where that thing crashed.
Steele took photos of the crashed helicopter and pried the manufacturer's identification tag from the helicopter door to send to the Marine Corps Museum, proving he had been there. That eventful trip would not be the last time Steele snuck onto a military aircraft. The U.S. advisor's work in Vietnam remained fairly clandestine. Active U.S. combat troops wouldn't arrive officially until 1965. The spotlight and cameras and questions about the U.S. involvement in the war would mostly come later. The gap between what American leaders told the public and what was actually happening on the ground in Vietnam would continue for years and foment government distrust stateside. But first, the Cold War politics that brought Steele to Vietnam would bring danger much closer to home. Once Steele returned to the States from his first Vietnam deployment, he heard rumblings about Cuba. The Soviet Union was preparing for a possible nuclear war with the United States. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was around the corner, and Steele would be there, whether he had permission or not. In episode 2, Steele talks about how he snuck onto a military plane bound for Cuba to do his own reconnaissance. You'll also hear him talk about an operation in the Dominican Republic before heading back to Vietnam.
So we flew down to Gitmo, but I worked my way all around the perimeter, checking all the positions completely around. I was down there 7 days and no one caught on. I was there for the deadline. So tick, 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 boom, this is it.
This series was written and produced by me, Ashly McGlone, with editing and production assistance from Kayla Jimenez. Special thank you to the Lyndon B. Johnson Library, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, the U.S. National Archives, and other public domain sources. And thank you to Grandpa James Steele for his service and sharing his story. This podcast is supported by the Marine Reconnaissance Foundation, a nonprofit that supports reconnaissance Marines and their families. Visit reconfoundation.org to learn more. This podcast was recorded in Lake Forest, California, and at the San Mateo County Library's Belmont Library Makerspace.